If you've ever lived in a suburban neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, or HOA, then you know the peculiar flavor of power some folks develop when handed a clipboard and the authority to send passive-aggressive emails. That was my life in Willow Creek Estates, a picturesque little suburb nestled somewhere between the illusion of harmony and the reality of nosy neighbors who think they're deputies of order. I moved in 5 years ago with my wife and our dog, Lucy. We weren't looking for trouble. We just wanted a quiet place with good schools, trimmed lawns, and Saturday BBQs. And for a while, that's exactly what we had. Enter Karen. Now, I know Karen gets thrown around a lot these days, but this woman was the archetype, the prototype, the final boss of Karens. Platinum blonde hair that never moved, sunglasses permanently affixed to her forehead, and an unshakable belief that the rules didn't apply to her, but that she was absolutely the enforcer of them for everyone else. HOA president for 3 years running, she considered herself the queen of Willow Creek. And if Karen didn't like something? Oh, you'd hear about it, either in a tersely worded letter, a summons to an emergency HOA meeting, or through the grapevine, where gossip grew faster than the hydrangeas she had illegally planted in the communal garden. Our first run-in was over my trash cans. It was the kind of incident so small that it shouldn't have mattered, but in HOA land, minor infractions are major crimes. I had pulled my bins to the curb the night before pickup day, just like everyone else. But I got a letter. Violation: trash cans not to be placed curbside before 6 a.m. on collection day. Please be advised future infractions will result in a fine. It was signed, of course, by Karen. I checked the bylaws. Sure enough, the rule existed, buried on page 17 under Solid Waste Guidelines. Still, no one had ever enforced it. Karen had decided to make an example of me. From then on, she had it out for us. The mailbox wars started 6 months later. My original mailbox was nothing special. A standard black postbox mounted on a simple wooden pole, installed when the development was built. It did its job. It wasn't tilting, it wasn't rusty, and it certainly wasn't offensive. But Karen, she said it didn't meet the updated aesthetic vision outlined in the HOA's newly revised landscaping addendum, something she'd personally authored. I told her respectfully that as long as it functioned and met postal regulations, I saw no need to change it. That was strike 2 in her book. A week later, I found it leaning at a 45-degree angle, the wood splintered, the box itself crushed. At first, I thought maybe it had been an accident, teenagers joyriding or a careless Amazon truck. I replaced it with a sturdier model and brushed it off. Then it happened again. And again. By the 4th time, I knew it wasn't an accident. Karen lived 3 houses down, and her driveway was across from a bend in the road that made for a tight turn. More than once, I'd seen her cut the corner far too sharply in her white Range Rover, the wheels grinding the curb like a racing circuit. But she always seemed to steer perfectly clear of every other mailbox, just mine. The damage was always at just the right angle and just the right depth to suggest she'd done it deliberately, or at the very least, without the faintest care. I tried confronting her once. I caught her one afternoon while she was walking her tiny designer dog, some yappy thing named Bentley, in a stroller, of all things. I approached calmly, politely, and asked if she'd noticed anything unusual around my mailbox. She smiled in that way only someone deeply fake can smile. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, in the same tone one might use with a child who dropped their ice cream. "You know, maybe you should consider moving it a little further back from the curb. Some of us have wider vehicles." I didn't take the bait. I said I'd consider it. Then she added casually, "Or maybe it's just not built to last. You know, some people just don't understand the standards we try to maintain here." That was it. That smug, dismissive, sugar-coated jab. I went home and stared at the mangled wreckage of my mailbox. It wasn't just bent. It was as though someone had gunned the accelerator at the last second. There were fresh tire marks on the curb, faint but visible. I took photos. I filed a complaint with the HOA. And what did I get back? A form letter. After review, the HOA has found no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. Residents are encouraged to use reinforced materials and adhere to the HOA design standards when installing mailboxes. It was signed by Karen. Strike 3. At that point, I started documenting everything. I installed a cheap security camera aimed directly at the mailbox. The first few nights, nothing happened. I almost started to believe maybe the whole thing was coincidence. Then, on a Wednesday morning at 6:12 a.m., her Range Rover came into frame. Slow roll. Then a sharp, deliberate swerve. The front passenger bumper clipped the post like it was a bowling pin. She didn't stop. Didn't flinch. Just kept driving. My mailbox tipped over in slow motion, crumpling like a soda can. I had her. Or so I thought. I sent the footage to the HOA board. I figured, finally, she'd be held accountable. She'd have to pay for the damage, maybe even face a fine or, if justice really worked, a forced resignation. Instead, I got a phone call from the HOA vice president, a quiet man named Douglas who always looked like he regretted attending meetings. I reviewed the footage, he said, hesitantly. But, unfortunately, it's not clear enough to prove intent. Karen claims it was an accident, and the footage doesn't conclusively contradict that. I was stunned. Are you kidding? She aims for it. Well, he said with a sigh, these things are tricky. We can't afford legal liability if we accuse someone without irrefutable evidence. Maybe try moving your mailbox to a safer location. A safer location. Like where? The roof. It became clear. The HOA was a shield for Karen. Either they were afraid of her, complicit in her reign of pettiness, or just too lazy to do anything about it. My options were running low. Still, I tried to play the game. I installed another mailbox, metal this time, with a treated oak post sunk in 2 feet of concrete. It had clean lines, black matte paint, and even a little brass flag. Karen wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I submitted the design to the HOA, and after 3 weeks of bureaucratic delay, I got the green light. The first week, it stayed intact. Then, 2 days after the next board meeting, it was obliterated. Not bent. Not chipped. Obliterated. Post snapped like a twig, the box shattered across the lawn. Bits of brass flag glinted in the morning sun like shrapnel from a mailbox war zone. This wasn't careless driving anymore. This was war. My wife wanted to call the police. I did, but they told me unless I had direct evidence and could prove malicious intent, good luck, it was a civil matter. So I filed an insurance claim. Again. And as I was taking photos for the adjuster, I noticed something in the grass. A tiny piece of white plastic. I picked it up. It was part of a Range Rover emblem. I snapped a photo of that, too. I printed everything. I gathered dates, timestamps, incident reports. I created a binder. Yes, a real binder like I was prepping for court. Then I submitted the entire thing to the HOA again. This time, I got no response. No email. No letter. No phone call. And then, the following week, I received a citation from the HOA for unapproved lawn decor, referencing the temporary plastic bin I'd placed to hold mail while I figured out what to do next. A $50 fine. No appeals allowed. That was it. That was the moment. I stood in my driveway, looking at the splintered ruins of my 6th mailbox, the citation crumpled in one fist, and I made a decision. If they wouldn't stop Karen, then I would. Not with anger. Not with yelling. But with something much, much better. Engineering. I wasn't just going to replace the mailbox this time. I was going to design a monument. A trap. A piece of suburban art so diabolical and yet so perfectly within regulation that Karen would never see it coming. And when she hit it, and she would hit it, it wouldn't be the mailbox that broke. It would be her car. And maybe, just maybe, her power trip. Something snapped in me that day, not in an angry scream-at-the-sky kind of way, but in a cold, focused kind of way. Like a circuit had completed itself. Karen had crossed a line, and the HOA had failed to defend it. The sixth destroyed mailbox was no longer a random act of destruction. It was a message. A declaration of authority. She was daring me to push back, confident I wouldn't, because no one ever had. That's when I remembered something my grandfather used to say: if you keep letting people walk all over you, don't be surprised when they use your face for a welcome mat. Well, not anymore. I decided to fight back, not with fists or threats, but with science. See, I'm not just some passive suburban dad with a grill and a golden retriever. I've got a degree in mechanical engineering, a garage full of tools, and a decent understanding of Newton's laws of motion. You want war, Karen? Fine. But I'm going to beat you at your own game. Quietly, legally, and with a mailbox so indestructible it would laugh in the face of your Range Rover. But first, I needed to do some research. I started by diving into the USPS regulations for residential mailboxes. The Postal Service, it turns out, is extremely specific about dimensions, height from the ground, placement from the curb, and even how easily it should yield to impact. In other words, your mailbox technically has to give if struck by a vehicle, to prevent injury or further damage. But, crucially, it doesn't define what material it has to be made from. So I called an old buddy from college, Jason, who now works in materials science at a private lab. We hopped on a video call, and I told him the whole story. He laughed for about 5 minutes straight. Then he said, "Okay, so you want a mailbox that's technically legal but still built like a tank?" Exactly. Jason was all in. You're going to want composite reinforcement. I'll send you a few sheets of ballistic polycarbonate and a hybrid alloy we're testing for vehicle panels. You wrap that in a wooden shell to make it look normal, and it's basically mailbox armor. Perfect. Next, I needed a foundation that wouldn't budge. Concrete wasn't enough. Karen had destroyed my last concrete post. So I drew up a design with a 5-foot metal support beam, sunk 3 feet into the ground and anchored with a rebar cage, kind of like how they secure traffic light poles. Over that, I'd slip a pressure-treated oak sleeve, stained and finished to look completely HOA compliant. The post would appear standard from the outside, but inside it would be stronger than any curbside obstacle she'd ever faced. Then I added the cherry on top: shock absorption sensors and a GoPro hidden in a nearby birdhouse, set to record every time motion was detected within a 6-foot radius of the mailbox. Redundant, but satisfying. I spent the next 3 weekends quietly building it in my garage. My wife, bless her, didn't even ask questions anymore, just brought me snacks and offered subtle looks of admiration and a little concern. I told her everything was under control. I poured the concrete under cover of dusk. No one saw it go in. A few days later, I installed the oak sleeve, adjusted the box to regulation height, and mounted the reinforced polycarbonate box itself. It looked just like every other mailbox on the street. Clean, neutral, boring. But inside, it was anything but. To the casual observer, it was just another suburban fixture. To Karen, it was the same old target. To me, it was a trap. Then came the waiting game. I didn't want to rush her. I didn't even want to provoke her. I wanted her to believe she had already won. I kept quiet, stayed low profile, and let her see the new box sitting there, alone, vulnerable, unguarded. I even left a few slightly askew tufts of sod near the base, as if it hadn't settled quite right. And sure enough, about a week later, I caught a glimpse of her car slowing down as she rounded the bend. She was checking it out. She was hunting. The anticipation turned me into a kid on Christmas Eve. I checked the GoPro memory card every night. Nothing. Then, a tire mark a few inches closer one morning. Still no impact. Just reconnaissance. She was going to make it count. Meanwhile, I prepared for the aftermath. I knew I couldn't directly accuse her. Not yet. But I could be ready for when the moment came. I printed out HOA bylaws, highlighted relevant clauses, and kept my documentation organized in a labeled binder with color-coded tabs. I even had a separate file for police reports, USPS inspection guidelines, and video evidence chain of custody forms. If this was going to court, or just the court of public opinion, I'd walk in prepared. Then, just before dawn on a rainy Thursday morning, it happened. The GoPro caught everything. 6:43 a.m. Her Range Rover comes into frame, creeping around the corner slower than usual. The windshield wipers are going. She pauses, aligns, then accelerates, only slightly, but enough to indicate intent. The front bumper connects dead center with the mailbox. But this time, there's no satisfying crunch. Instead, the car bucks like it hit a wall. The box doesn't move. The post doesn't wobble. Karen's bumper caves in with a grotesque pop of plastic and fiberglass. Her head jerks forward, and her expression morphs from smug confidence to pure shock. She throws it into reverse. Stops. Puts it in drive again, and rams it a second time. Same result. This time, the hood crumples. A small puff of steam rises. Her left headlight goes out. She sits there for several seconds, clearly stunned. Then she finally backs up, tires screeching slightly as she swerves and drives off, pieces of her grill trailing in the street behind her like breadcrumbs. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. Finally, the trap had been sprung. I printed stills. I backed up the footage to a flash drive. And I calmly waited for the fallout. Sure enough, later that afternoon, I received an email from the HOA. Not a warning this time, a complaint. Karen had filed a report alleging that my mailbox was constructed in a dangerous and malicious way that caused severe damage to her personal vehicle, and she was requesting a full board hearing to demand its removal and my censure. She even included photos of her own damaged car. I nearly choked on my coffee. That Friday, I attended the HOA board meeting. Karen showed up with sunglasses and a manila envelope, her hair a little flatter than usual, like she'd had a rough day or 10. She didn't look at me once. The meeting began with her reading a prepared statement full of vague legal threats and indignation. She said my mailbox was an unapproved structure clearly intended to cause vehicular damage, and claimed I had booby-trapped public right-of-way. When they asked if I had a response, I calmly opened my binder and handed out copies of the USPS regulations, the approved HOA mailbox guidelines, with my approved submission copy, and the full-color diagram of my mailbox specs, compliant down to the inch. Then I played the GoPro footage. The boardroom was silent. The video showed her line up the car, drive into the mailbox, reverse, then try again. It was undeniable. She hadn't accidentally hit it. She'd targeted it, just like she had all the others. Only this time, it hit back. When the lights came back on, I said, I've filed a police report as well, and I've documented all 6 previous incidents. This footage is also backed up to a secure cloud server. I'm happy to press charges, but I'd prefer to settle this here if we can. The room turned on her. Even Douglas, the spineless VP, cleared his throat and said, "Well, that's certainly compelling." Karen tried to pivot. She said I'd set her up. She said it was entrapment. She said the video was edited. No one bought it. Ultimately, the HOA ruled that my mailbox was fully compliant and within regulations. They dismissed her complaint, and in an unprecedented move, they issued her a formal reprimand for misuse of HOA authority and for damaging a resident's property. For Karen, it was the first real consequence she'd ever faced. But the story didn't end there. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People I hadn't spoken to in months came by to shake my hand. Some even brought baked goods. One guy, George from Elm Street, said, "Man, we've been dealing with her crap for years." "You're a legend." I didn't feel like a legend. I felt like someone who had finally stopped being afraid. Over the next few weeks, Karen's influence began to fade. Her emails got shorter. Her tone less sharp. A few people openly questioned her at HOA meetings, which had never happened before. Then one day, a "for sale" sign quietly appeared on her lawn. 3 months later, she was gone. I don't know where she went, and I don't care. But the mailbox still stands. To this day, it's never been touched again. Birds nest near it. Kids leave little chalk messages on the sidewalk beside it. Even the mail carrier once left a sticky note on the door that said, "Solid craftsmanship." And every time I see it, I smile. Not because I won, but because I finally stood up. Not with anger. Not with vengeance. But with logic, patience, and a little bit of righteous engineering. Because sometimes, the best revenge is reinforced. If the engineered mailbox was the punch, and the GoPro footage the knockout, what came next was the standing ovation, and the final unraveling of Karen's reign over the neighborhood. In the days following the HOA hearing, there was an unfamiliar sense of peace on our street. No unsolicited violation notices appeared in mailboxes. No angry emails filled our inboxes. The once constant buzz of Karen's complaints about lawn heights, garbage bins, or where someone parked their car, went quiet. Karen, for the first time, had been publicly embarrassed. Not just to the HOA board, but to the entire neighborhood. Word travels fast in communities like ours, and everyone had heard about her failed attack on the mailbox. By the end of the week, someone had already turned it into a meme on the neighborhood Facebook group, Karen vs. The Indestructible Mailbox, Final Score, Mailbox 2, Karen 0. It spread like wildfire. I didn't post the video myself. I didn't have to. Someone on the HOA board, maybe even Douglas, had leaked it. Within 72 hours, nearly everyone in the subdivision had seen Karen's Range Rover bouncing off my mailbox like it hit a brick wall. The clip was only 10 seconds long, but it played on loop in conversations, texts, and comments. You could hear the laughter echoing from porches and backyards. But this wasn't just neighborhood gossip anymore. This was a tipping point. Suddenly, residents began stepping forward, emboldened. Stories started circulating. Some whispered, some posted online. One neighbor said Karen fined them for planting tulips that weren't within the community's approved floral palette. Another claimed she told their 9-year-old to move his bicycle off the driveway because it obstructed the aesthetic harmony of the cul-de-sac. A retired couple admitted she made them take down a handmade birdhouse because it lacked architectural cohesion. People were furious. And now, with proof of her vindictiveness and recklessness, they had a target. What had once been isolated annoyances now felt like part of a pattern, a power-hungry woman using her HOA role as a personal kingdom. A movement started. At first, it was subtle. Neighbors whispering during dog walks, more open eye rolls when Karen passed by, and a few extra flags or decorative items showing up in defiance of her overly rigid interpretations. But it quickly escalated. Within 2 weeks, a petition to call for a vote of no confidence in Karen's HOA presidency was drafted and circulated. I didn't start it, but when it landed on my doorstep, I signed without hesitation. So did nearly everyone on the block. The petition didn't just focus on the mailbox incident. It listed over a dozen specific abuses of power, backed by testimonies and photographic evidence. Some people included citations of misquoted bylaws, forged HOA notices, and even an instance where Karen allegedly altered the minutes of a board meeting. The final straw? A parent presented a printed email where Karen had referred to neighborhood children playing soccer as unsightly chaos, and suggested they go elsewhere before someone calls the authorities. That lit a fire under everyone. At the next HOA meeting, a special session called specifically to discuss the petition, Karen arrived earlier than usual. She wore a stiff blazer over a floral blouse, and her makeup was just a little too perfect, like she was trying to hold on to the illusion of control. But the room was different now. The mood had shifted. No one rose to greet her. No one smiled. The board allowed her to speak first. She launched into a defensive circular tirade about her years of tireless dedication and thankless work, blaming a smear campaign orchestrated by ungrateful residents. I almost admired her nerve. Then came the testimonies. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke, quietly, firmly, with facts in hand. Some brought documentation. Others brought emotion. A few fought back tears. One woman recounted how Karen harassed her elderly father for leaving his recycling bin out too long, after he'd just returned from the hospital. A young couple told of how she denied their backyard renovation because the fence was too expressive. The board listened. So did Karen. But her face hardened. Her smile vanished. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I stood up, held up the printed HOA regulations, and said, I followed every rule. And she still tried to destroy my property. Twice. If she's allowed to keep her position after that, then these rules mean nothing. And then I sat down. Silence hung in the air like fog. Even Douglas looked uncomfortable. A vote was held. 5 board members. 3 needed to vote yes to initiate a community-wide leadership recall. The results? Unanimous. Karen was officially suspended from her role pending a neighborhood vote, to be held within 10 days. During that time, she would have no authority to issue violations, handle complaints, or represent the HOA in any capacity. For someone who had wielded power like a weapon, that might as well have been a prison sentence. She didn't even stay for the rest of the meeting. Just grabbed her folder and left. We all watched her go. And for the first time, I think I saw the real Karen. Not the tyrant in yoga pants and Range Rover, but a person who had built her self-worth on the illusion of control. And now that illusion was crumbling. The recall vote went forward. Flyers went out. Door-to-door canvassers knocked politely. People who had never even attended an HOA meeting showed up to have their say. It wasn't about one mailbox anymore. It was about years of being afraid to speak up. Now, the dam had burst. On voting day, the turnout was massive. People lined up outside the community center like it was election season. Neighbors greeted each other like old friends, as if the process itself was helping us rediscover the kind of neighborhood we wanted to live in, one of respect, not fear. The results? 82% voted to remove Karen. She was officially stripped of her title and permanently barred from holding an HOA position in the neighborhood again. It was over. Sort of. About a month later, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. The blinds were drawn. No garage sales, no farewells. Just quiet boxes being loaded into the back of a U-Haul while the Range Rover, now with a replaced bumper, idled in the driveway. Then, just like that, she was gone. A few weeks later, a new family moved in. 2 parents, 3 kids, and a dog that barked way too much. No one complained. Instead, people brought over casseroles, offered help unpacking, and told them, it's a good neighborhood. It's even better now. As for me, well, the mailbox still stands. Not a scratch on it. It's become kind of a symbol now. Some people walk past it and give it a nod or a tap like it's a lucky charm. Someone even stuck a small sticker on the back that says, HOA tested, Karen approved. I left it there. But the real change wasn't the mailbox. It was the neighborhood. With Karen gone, people started connecting more. There were impromptu barbecues. Sidewalk chalk murals. A neighborhood watch formed, not to spy on each other, but to look out for each other. Even the new HOA board began implementing changes. Monthly meetings were now open forums, not closed-door tribunals. Landscaping guidelines were relaxed. Fines had to be approved by a majority, not just one person. Transparency became the new standard. It took a while, but the street began to feel like a community again. One where kids could leave their bikes out without fear of a violation. One where Halloween decorations could be a little goofy. One where people remembered that a neighborhood isn't just a collection of houses, it's the people living in them. I still get asked about the mailbox story. Sometimes by new neighbors, sometimes by people who heard the legend from someone else. And every time I tell it, I end it the same way. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just got tired of replacing my mailbox. But deep down, I know it was more than that. It was about boundaries. About standing up. About saying, no more, and meaning it. And sometimes, all it takes to bring down a tyrant is a mailbox that doesn't move.